a couple weeks ago, I ran the Houston Marathon on January 15th.
Go, Jenny!
And I already put out a recap video of most of the ins and outs of that race day and trying to go for a sub 3:30 and ultimately getting a PR, a Boston qualifying time, and negative splitting that race. What I left out in that video was my fueling strategy, hydration strategy, just because I felt like that really needed its own video and was going to take up a lot of time in there anyway. So here we are with that video with fueling, and we're also going to talk about what hydration and my electrolyte intake look like as well. So starting with the days leading up to that, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I was carb loading, basically starting 3 days out. It's very different than maybe what you've heard traditionally of carb loading being eating this huge bowl of spaghetti the night before your race. You definitely don't want to overdo it and overfill yourself. It's really more about taking in lots of easy to digest carbs in those few days leading up. Beyond eating in those days before, electrolyte intake was also a really big deal. Really, for any marathon, you want this to be a focus of yours, but for me especially, going into a race that I knew was going to be humid and warm, I knew that I needed to up the electrolyte intake than what I would maybe have done in the past for a race like CIM that was much cooler, or just training in Colorado in the winter months. I mean, I'm coming from cold and dry to warm and humid, and so I needed to take that into account. So in those couple days before, I was upping my electrolyte intake, mostly by taking drink mixes, which this isn't the only way to do it. Obviously, you can add sodium to your food or eat, higher sodium content foods. Something like salted pretzels is one that comes to mind. But it's easy sometimes to use things that are specifically geared towards this, that you can read the content right there on the label. So Element is something that I started using last summer. This has 1,000 milligrams of sodium in one packet, and so I was taking this a couple days before. Noon is something that I drink quite a few days a week. I don't drink it always. I drink it a lot more in the summertime, but I definitely was drinking this all week in the days leading up as well, just upping this by taking Element. And then when I had been researching for my own athletes to help them for the New York City Marathon, I came across nutritionists recommending this particular product. It's called Scratch Hyperhydration. And I had kind of forgotten about it after that, but then one of my athletes mentioned it. Thanks, Perry. And so I ordered some immediately after he was talking about it, thinking I'm gonna need that for Houston. So I ended up taking in one of these full packets the day before the marathon. And this has a ton of sodium, you guys, 1,720 milligrams of sodium in here. This is certainly not something you want to be taking on a daily basis or taking often or even taking for all your races. In fact, it says right on here for extreme conditions. So something where it's going to be warmer, more humid, somewhere you're going to be sweating a lot and you're going to have to be replenishing those electrolytes, that sodium that you are losing. So that's the days leading up to the race. So the morning of the race, I get up, we check the weather. It's going to be a high of 76 degrees, 81% humidity, I believe. So I can tell you, I felt that immediately upon going outside. It felt very different than what we're used to here in Colorado, and especially again, coming from training in cold to running in that type of weather was very different. So upon waking though, I like to drink 16 ounces of water. I drank 8 plain, and then I started drinking noon right after that. In fact, I think I even, if I remember correctly, poured a little bit of one of these packets in there too, just to up the sodium. I did not have a whole packet, but I like to drink water right away so that it goes through me and that I make sure I have time to pee before, at least a couple times, as well as I just know I'm getting that hydration front loaded there. And then I'm sipping throughout the morning as needed. After that, I am eating breakfast. I had a bagel with peanut butter and a banana, which is a typical breakfast for me on a long run day. I would recommend you do something that has a carb content similar to that, more or less, depending on what you need for your particular body. So just to give you an idea of what I was walking into the race with, on my person. This is basically between what I could hold in my sports bra as well as my shorts. So these were the gels that I had. Okay, so I had all of this on me. There were 7. I had 2 of these water bottles, and then I also had some of these electrolyte fast chews as well as caplets tucked into a tinier pocket as well. So just a lot of stuff. That's why sometimes it's nice to know what is on the course and be used to that. But I think for the most part, people are utilizing their own nutrition because they know what works for them going into the race. Okay, so I'm gonna go through with you everything that I had during the race. I have this kind of written in a timeline form, so it's easy for you guys to see. I will put this in a link below in case you want to snag it for yourself, in case it's helpful for you. Everyone is going to be different, so you need to find what works for you and practice in your long runs. But following a strategy similar to this is what I recommend to most people, as long as your stomach can handle it. And that's why you need to train this way, so that you can train your stomach to handle what you need in the marathon. And if you watch the video of my team call with Jen Scott, she's an endurance fueling nutritionist. She shared that really she's never seen anyone fuel too much. So it's kind of like err on the side of too much and take what you know your body can handle, and that's only gonna serve you better in most cases. Okay, so starting from right before the race, so about 10 minutes before the start, I was taking a Huma gel. This is the double caffeinated one. This has 25 grams of carbohydrates. Right, and then I started running, and in that first mile, I could just tell that I was warmer than I typically am. It was just a higher rate of perceived exertion. So it's really important, you guys, to listen to your body, and sometimes you do have to make adjustments on the fly. So I talked about the pacing already, but in terms of the fueling and hydration, you know, those were decisions that I had to make as I went along. I will say, actually, the fueling stayed the same as once I started. I flexed it a little bit going into it, but once I started, it stayed the same throughout. So I'll talk about hydration in just a minute. But going forward, you know, I get to the 30-minute mark and I take my first gel. That's the plan. So I take the strawberry Huma gel. This has 22 grams of carbs. Around this time, I'm also starting to sip the Tailwind that I had. So I had 2 scoops of Tailwind in one 8.5-ounce flask, okay, mixed with water, obviously. And so that has 50 grams of carbs. Now I had that, I was sipping that kind of throughout. I was probably finished with that around the 2.5-hour mark. So I didn't take any Tailwind after that. Next is this Awesomesauce, which is probably very different than the gels that you are used to in terms of calorie content and carb content. So this has 45 grams of carbs, so nearly double, some even double a regular gel. And so even though I'm taking this like at the 1 hour mark, the every 30 minutes, it's really like I'm almost taking 2 gels when I take this one. So my coach introduced me to these and they have been amazing. They are expensive, but I highly recommend them, especially as you guys get into like the 18-20 milers, and then being able to use them for your marathon as well. Or you could also obviously take 2 gels, you know, at that hour mark and have an equivalent to what I had here. Okay, so then 1.5 hours, I am taking a Huma Plus gel. So these have more electrolytes in them than a typical gel. 30 minutes later, I'm at 2 hours, taking another Spring Awesomesauce with the 45 grams of carbs, get to 2.5 hours and taking a Huma Plus again with those additional electrolytes, 21 grams of carbs in that. Then at the 3 hour mark, so this is the last one that I took. By this point, guys, I was feeling like I did not want to take another gel, but I knew that I needed to. So at some point I started kind of sipping more on this, which I'll say I kind of sip my gels in general. I don't just take them all within 30 seconds. You know, I'm kind of sipping on them over the course of a few minutes. I just feel like that works better for me. So once I got to about eating half of this, I threw it out. I literally was about to gag. I didn't want to eat anymore. If you guys have been in a marathon at the end, you probably know what I mean, that you are just like over the stuff, over the sweetness, and you just want to get to the end. And kind of your plan sometimes goes out the window a little bit, although I would recommend sticking to it as close as possible. All right, so that was it for fueling. Okay, so just to give you guys the exact picture of what I took in, that was 229 grams of carbs for basically from that first gel I took right before the start line to the end of my race. And that comes out an equivalent of 65 grams of carbs per hour, about roughly. And then if you guys are thinking, okay, well, what if I'm running longer than 3.5 hours? What if it's 4 hours? What if it's 5 hours? You know, you can continue on with that every 30 minutes fueling. You know, you're going to have to sustain that energy throughout the time that you are extending that run. And again, I said before, it doesn't necessarily need to be every 30 minutes. For some people, maybe it's closer to 40 to 45 minutes. You've got to train and see what works best for you. This is what I did, and it ended up working out really well for me in the fueling department. And being able to get a personal record in the marathon at the age of 42, get another Boston qualifying time. I did miss my goal by 54 seconds. I was trying to get a sub 3:30. But honestly, with the conditions of the day, I felt really, really good about that. And ultimately just had a lot of energy at the end of the race. The last 8 miles, I felt, you know, really good as you can for the end of a marathon. But you know, the biggest indicator is that I was able to run my fastest paces in that last 10K, you know, really getting down to about around those 750s that, you know, I was kind of hoping for a longer period of time, but at least being able to finish strong, which I cannot say enough about how important that is and feels so good in a marathon. Okay, so in terms of the hydration and electrolytes, I just want to touch on that before we finish up. But in addition to the 8.5 ounce flask of Tailwind that I had, that obviously had water in it, so that counts. I had another one of these that had just plain water. So the pockets of my shorts, I have like compression shorts. I was able to have one of these in each of those pockets and was using them as I needed. Now, this is not the only water I had. I ended up going to every single hydration station and taking water. So within the first mile, as I was saying, I knew almost immediately that I was going to have to adjust what I had done in the past, just from how warm it felt, how much I was already sweating, RPE, things like that. So making sure that I was taking in enough electrolytes. So I was very prepared in what I brought. And just FYI, guys, gels have sodium in them as well. So you count that, which would be okay in probably the cooler marathons. For something like I did, I needed to up that intake. But you need to be taking electrolytes alongside your water. So make sure that you have sodium in your marathon to take alongside that just pure water hydration. You need to have both. So additional electrolytes that I was taking, I had a few of these electrolyte fast chews, but these have quite a bit less sodium than their caps, which I found out. So this is the first marathon I've ever used these caplets. Actually, I think it was the first time ever that I used these caplets. They come in a bottle like this, but they have, one caplet has 215 milligrams of sodium. So a very, very good amount. I ended up taking in a lot of sodium throughout this race. And again, it served me well. And I think that I approached it in a really positive manner. Beyond that, with making sure I had enough water, I was going through every water stop, and normally I wouldn't do that in a cooler marathon. And so I actually ended up stopping at 3 water stations too to fill up my water bottle. And when it was empty. So I'm talking not fill it all the way to the top, but I would like drink a cup and then take another cup and pour it down here, which is only like, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 ounces of water. I just knew that I wanted it between, and that was after I had already drank what was in there. I hope that was really helpful for you guys in terms of, you know, trying to decide what you want to do for your fueling and hydration. Just take these as ideas for you, play with it and figure out what is going to work for you. But I will say, trying to mimic something similar to this that has a lot more carbohydrates and sodium than you probably would normally think that you would. Sodium, especially if it's a warmer marathon, is going to lead you to a much, much better and stronger performance, a faster marathon time, which I know that is something that's probably important to a lot of you.